The Last of Us Part 2. A game that we've been waiting for 7 years. I even remember where I was when I heard the news of this game coming out. Boy, it's been a while since the internet has been this divided. The last time I saw something like this was back with the Cybertruck release.
Oh my god. Well, maybe that was a little too hard.
And that wasn't even that long ago. I do wonder what Elon Musk thinks about this game. That'd be a good meme review episode. Now I'm going to put The Last of Us in a grading scale of 70% about the story and 30% about the gameplay. I believe that's a fair assessment since this is a story-driven game. They even postponed the release of the Factions multiplayer in order for them to focus more on the story. I'm also going to take into account the bar that the first game has set in judging its predecessor. So let's dive into the gameplay, shall we? This game is the best guitar simulator out there. Okay, all jokes aside, the gameplay, compared to the last one, is definitely outstanding. From the added movement options and the fluidity of the action, it definitely matches the prowess of the meticulous, beautiful graphics that this world shows us. The puzzle maze map is certainly interesting enough to keep the player engaged while we meticulously search for supplies and items for the next upcoming skirmish that we may encounter. The artificial intelligence of your enemies is definitely much better than the prequel. However, of course, the AI of your ally is still questionable but forgivable. It would be nice if you're allowed to tweak something in the difficulty settings to have your ally be detrimental to your combat, but that's just me, and I wouldn't take any points away for that. The weapons that they have showed us in the game is certainly a good indicator of what we may have in the multiplayer. When we switch characters, we definitely saw a difference in not only the weapons, but the items that they have, aka the throwables. Now I don't know about you, but I'm definitely going to put the bar of how good this multiplayer is as high or even higher than the one in Uncharted 4. That means more game modes, perhaps even a survival mode, and I just hope that they utilize a huge map like the one in Seattle. But since it didn't come out with this game, we're going to judge it separately. The potential to have a great multiplayer for this game is definitely promising, and I hope Naughty Dog will properly deliver. Now there are two things that has caught the attention of a lot of people about this game, and that's the rope and the guitar. The rope is certainly an excellent entity behaving and interacting with its environment realistically, but the guitar is a whole new story. The amount of potential that this has is amazing, and the people are certainly making good use of it. So with that, I'd give the gameplay a perfect score of a 3 out of 3. Now let's get into the story.
I know you wish things were different. I wish things were different, but they ain't.
Let's begin with the end, the most divisive moment of the game. A lot of people hated it, and some actually liked it. I, on the other hand, am with the former. And that's because in the end, instead of a calm after the storm, a tsunami hits, leaving you to struggle to recover emotionally. With this game's ending, just like a tsunami coming after a storm, it doesn't really make any sense. I'll elaborate on that later. But first, there's a pretty good counter argument made by Girlfriend Reviews about the ending, so let's take a listen.
Many people are upset that a 30-hour revenge plot doesn't end in revenge. But remember, plot does not govern story. The Last of Us 1's Cure the Zombie Apocalypse plot was very famously thwarted by Joel's story. And once again, in The Last of Us 2, each character's story concludes in defiance of the plot.
I agree with that, however, I'm gonna get into semantics here. The theme was the one to govern in the end. Like the first game, the theme was about love, while the second one being about hatred and revenge. Joel's final action is a reflection of that theme of love. However, Ellie's final action is definitely not a reflection of hatred and vengeance. Personally, I disagree with Joel's final action, me being for the Fireflies and all, but at least it makes sense. His motivations were clear, understandable, and presented well in the very beginning of the game. Now with Ellie, I actually agree with her decision of sparing Abby's life, but it doesn't really make sense. What, did Ellie suddenly become Rick Grimes and went,
Mercy prevails over my wrath?
when realistically she would have been like,
over! It's not over until he's dead! It's not over until he's dead!
And just like Maggie, they essentially went through the same tribulations. Let me refresh your memory.
Back to it.
Maggie, I'll find you.
Yeah, pretty similar. Girlfriend Reviews has another point that's worth reflecting on, and that's,
If you reach the credits and wish you could have killed Abby, even after walking a mile in her shoes, then you may have beat the game you were playing with your controller, but you may have lost the game that Naughty Dog was playing with your soul.
I think it's fair for people who's invested time, money, and even emotionally on a game to hate a dislikable character and despise the predetermined fate that she gets to enjoy. Implying that Naughty Dog played with the player's soul as if they have the final judgment on their character based on their emotional and logical reaction towards the story is somewhat self-righteous of them, which seems to be the current discourse of the gaming community. This game tries to be realistic and dark, with the reality of vengeance and violence, just like with a certain franchise that's familiar with most people. Yeah, I know, I'm comparing this to an anime.
That would be justice. However, what about my family? My friends? Everyone feels the same pain when losing something dear. You and I have both experienced that pain. You strive for your justice, and I strive for mine.
Man, Payne's voice actor should have done Abby. Okay, back to the point. The game then pulls a 180 to teach us a lesson that it had no right to teach. It would be as if Mel is teaching us how to
do right by these kids. Get out of their lives before you screw them over too.
After showing us how much of a responsible and caring mother she is. By doing so, the story essentially became inconsistent with the rest of the game, rendering all our efforts to be pointless. All the death we caused with both the involved parties and those caught in the crossfire, all pointless. Why is that? Because of a memory that would realistically motivate Ellie to finish the final act of vengeance. Now there can be an argument made to that, like for example,
And I think the ultimate lesson that The Last of Us Part 2 teaches the player is how well they cope with pain.
Again, I respectfully disagree with that because I believe the game didn't teach us how well we cope with pain, but more so asks us a question. That question being,
how would you confront this hatred in order to create peace?
And what a lot of people don't like is that the game answers for us, and most of us don't agree with that answer.
You really gonna go through with this?
I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
Well, that was a lie. Now there's another point that if Ellie killed Abby, it would have been as if Ellie became the very thing she wanted to destroy. Since the relationship between Abby and Lev is portrayed to be that of Ellie and Joel, leaving Lev in the same position as Ellie. That's a fair argument, but at least now Levi got a chance to live instead of dying on the pillars because Ellie pretty much saved him. Also, Abby's death wouldn't necessarily lead him to the path of vengeance because he wouldn't automatically know who killed her, essentially ending the vicious cycle of vengeance, but placing us in a route where at least no one won. A concept that I believe Jake from Vsauce can explain better.
A doctrine of military strategy that boils down to if you shoot at me, I'll shoot at you. But in this case, if you fire weapons of mass destruction at me, I will fire all of mine at you to make sure that neither of us wins, that everyone loses. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it's not crazy. In fact, it's mad. Mutually assured destruction.
This madness is the reality that we currently live in today. If The Last of Us Part 2 tackled this route, I believe it would have been ironed in the memory of the world in a better light, since ironically enough, it presents a darker yet more relatable, more appropriate, and more consistent way in ending this bleak story. But that's just my take on it.
I have to finish it. You can't stop this. I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill Every last one of them.
For any story, movie, show, or game to be great, it must make you go through a roller coaster of emotions in a palatable way. I know people will disagree on that, but I believe that is the consensus, which is why a lot of people like the first game, as it had a roller coaster of emotions that was more palatable. Now this game started that storm of emotions early on, when Joel was killed, with flashbacks trying to make the experience more digestible. Now don't get me wrong, I think using flashbacks in interactive media is definitely a bold attempt, but I think it fails to enhance the experience in this case by getting in the way of current pressing objectives. At least for me, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of players as well. The scavenging aspect of the gameplay even got affected by this type of delivery, as the items you collect in preparation for the next battle seem to become pointless in the end, since you're either gonna get a checkpoint full of all the ammo you'll ever need, or you won't even get to use them yourself since you'll switch to be playing as Abby, and the AI is pretty much gonna use it on you. But that's just the nitpick problem that I realized when I was starting my second run on this game. Now this type of narrative technique is just very common, and because of that, a lot of people are familiar with it. Since we've seen the potential on how well a story can be told this way, just like with the franchise I mentioned earlier that I keep comparing this game to, this essentially puts the standard of the story much higher than necessary. Though it may be different, both this game and its predecessor has a simpler premise and theme in its story, which is the first game masterfully executed through its delivery. I believe the story could have been delivered in a much more linear fashion, similar to the first game, without losing its charm of knowing the perspective of two characters, by having time jumps that the first game wasn't so shy on doing, but instead of going back and forth you just keep moving forward. Perhaps they could have even managed to place Joel's death later on in the story for a better climax when we've already sympathized with Abby, all the while giving us enough incentive to still go after her. But instead, we have a story that would be comparable to the blabbering of your friend jumping all over the place in their story to highlight key events. This is why a lot of people think the writing seemed unpolished. However, Girlfriend Reviews proves that isn't necessarily the case. I have linked her video in the description below as she goes in depth in explaining how well crafted the timelines really are.
What the fuck's the power doing off?
To end on a lighter note, let's look at the characters. Abby, the character that we were forced to like.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am. Motherfucker, take it outside. If you want to call me sir again, I will show you a fucking sir.
You're a piece of shit, Abby.
Let me compare her to a different character in a different story who was more successful in garnering the acceptance of the audience. Considering the shift of emotions and perspective of the fanbase of this other story, it does have some merit. Now I'm talking about Itachi Uchiha. The man, the myth, the legend. I even have an AMV on this channel about him, but I digress. Now you might be asking, how the f is this like Itachi Uchiha?
You asked me why I'm doing all this.
Let me explain. Much like the story's plot twist, the villain was trans-tagonist, placing us in a perspective where we can understand why these characters did what they did. In this case, Abby killing Joel and Itachi killing his clan. The reason why the audience's wide acceptance of Itachi compared to Abby is better is because of his motivations and his internal conflicts. This showed him to be a deeper character that we can relate to, as the internal conflict he is having is shared with us and we are truly immersed in his perspective. Unlike with Abby, whose only motivation is vengeance and nightmares. That was just not enough relatability for players to embrace her character, much less make her likable. Though apparently Neil has thought about doing it like this.
Initially this game was going to be open world with several different hubs, and the original hub was you're going to be playing as Abby, who has some backstory, and her friends get attacked, they get rescued by Joel and Tommy and get helped into Jackson, and you would then spend a while in Jackson doing missions before some critical point where Abby would reveal who she is, and she would be struggling with this choice and then kill Joel. And then you would take on as Ellie going on this journey to Seattle, and that would become the second hub of trying to find all these people and eventually confront Abby.
I understand scrapping the open world concept. However, scrapping that part where we can empathize more with Abby is hard to fathom. Joel, the jaded MC that we all have come to love. But this man's jadedness was apparently polished in his time in Jackson, considering the fact that he became unacceptably careless, which is why a lot of people found his demise hard to believe, even as to closing, deleting, or destroying the game entirely. Tommy, the best sniper of the game, that was apparently very trusting of strangers to give them their names in the heat of combat.
I'm Tommy, that's Joel. What's your name?
Manny, the speculative self-insert of Neil Druckmann himself. I don't know about you, but I actually like this character, even though I hated him in the very beginning of the game, like everyone else since he spat on Joel. But since we got to know that he's a Chad weeb in the apocalypse, I grew to accept him as a man of culture as well. Owen, the two-timing piece of shit. Yara, the big sister. Jesse, Glenn, Dina, Ellie's girlfriend. Mel, the most responsible mother in the apocalypse. Come on guys, she's a medic. She should know better than to put herself outside the stadium. Are we just gonna ignore the fact that there's mushroom zombies outside and a war with Seraphites? Okay, moving on. Lev, Ellie, Canadian edition. Now Ellie, a shittier Sasuke Uchiha, cause at least Sasuke got the balls to kill even his own brother. Yes, horrible comparison, but you get the point. Now I'm gonna address the fact that there's politics in the game, just like how Neil Druckmann stated it would.
No, you done got me talking politics. I think I'll scoot over here right by this window and let this beautiful carriage rock me to sleep.
But I won't factor it in the overall score of the game unless it's used to cover plot holes, which is not a lot, but there's a very comical one that's very hard to avoid. Also, special mention to these characters. Dina, the bisexual Jew. Lev, the prepubescent transgender. Mel, the feminist.
No one's okay with this? Why would it be up to Owen?
Abby, the ma'am, the myth, the New World patriarchy. This is the plot hole that I believe that is covered by politics, since the director does not like the fact that women are sexualized in video games. Now I'm gonna make a separate video elaborating on why her physique doesn't make sense and seems unnecessary, as he could have had a strong female character without having comical arms that's bigger than—
It is man!
Did we forget about Tess? She was definitely more of a badass than Abby. Oh, and let's not forget the—
Bigot sandwiches.
Smells good.
There's also Japan's take on this game, as it left a bad taste of industrial bias and hypocrisy, as to allow a female character that's not supposed to be sexual to blatantly have sex in the game, while other games would get censored to hell. Oh yeah, and also Neil's false advertising trailers.
The worst way that this game could be presented already happened, like our worst fear. Because we did so much to try to protect the story, right? Including putting fake shots in trailers and swapping skins on characters and recording a different line with Troy.
All these I will cover in a separate video, as most of the reasons I stated, except for some, doesn't affect the story at all. But I do understand why people can't avoid talking about this, because the situation is essentially trying to unsee something that's blatantly pointed out, like a funky image with a hidden message that's not so very hidden. Then those same people being called out all types of phobes for not liking the game, even though—
Wired published an interview with Druckmann, who once again stated his expectation that there are fans that will not like the narrative that they chose to go with. Druckmann cited from his hours of watching playtesters that he knows some of them did not like it and some absolutely hated it. Some of them are not going to like this game and not like where it goes and not like what it says or the fate of characters that they love. I'd rather have people passionately hate it than just be like, yeah, it was okay.
I can see this is hard on you guys. I am sorry. I truly am. But I did say it. No exceptions. I'm just getting started.
And unsurprisingly, that's what happened. But I'm not going to outright hate this game, even though it made me feel like I just got dumped. Neil took a risk, and he knew the odds were against him, so I can definitely acknowledge the fact that he shot for the stars, but at least he ended up on Mars. His attempt was bold in implementing this type of storytelling in interactive media and still making it work, though it may be far from perfect. Now, because the game made it difficult to empathize with Abby, with its delivery, also with accepting Joel's death, and understanding Ellie's decision in the ending, all the while being compared to the first game, which was a masterpiece, I'm gonna give this story a score of a 3.5 out of 7, with a final verdict of 65% total. Let me know in the comment section below if you agreed or disagreed with the points I made in this review. Add a timestamp so that we can get specific. Share the video with your group chat discussing this game and if you think it'll offer a differing perspective. Also consider making that red subscribe button to gray and turning the notification bell on for more Last of Us content. I'm also releasing weekly Last of Us Factions episodes until the multiplayer for The Last of Us Part 2 is released, in case you're interested in that. Take care out there, and remember, even though the Fireflies have been disbanded,
we took a beating, but we're not done yet.
You can still rise with us. Remember, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Believe in the Fireflies.